Hello, and welcome to the Formal Review. Today, we'll be having a very special episode, looking at 4 different movies. Now sit back, relax, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Formal Review. This is Season 4, Episode 31, and I thank you all for tuning in once again. Now, welcome to the 3rd episode in the award season series. As we are now in award season, there's still a lot of films to be seen. So every year, I watch all the films that have been nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, and then all the acting categories. I sometimes also watch screenplay films if I have time or if there's only 1 or 2 that I haven't seen. Now, the films were nominated toward the end of last month, and there's still a few more films that I haven't seen yet. And since there's only a month to put out these analyses of these films, we have increased the amount of films covered in each episode. Now, in the first one, I covered Don't Look Up, King Richard, and Drive My Car. In the second, I went into Belfast, Licorice Pizza, and Coda. However, for this episode, I'm going to be increasing that again to 4 films, looking at The Eyes of Tammy Faye, Being the Ricardos, Spencer, and Dune. So stay tuned.
Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast.
Now, before I get into anything, I do want to preface this episode, as always, with a slight spoiler warning. As always, I do suggest to go see the film first before hearing what I have to say about it, so you fully understand everything. Also,
I know I talk about this at the end, but the data shows that most people don't listen to that part, so I want to talk about it here and reiterate the importance of leaving reviews on your favorite subscription services. I do read those because I do want to grow, because these episodes are really for all you listeners out there, and I want to keep this entertaining. So what do you want to hear? Do you want to hear games? Do you want to hear more of the 4K stuff? Do you want to hear me talk about a certain movie? If you want to come on and talk to me about something, if you want to debate, I'm always open to do stuff like that. So you can always reach out to me on social media. I always want to grow and improve, and
just because something works doesn't mean that it cannot be improved.
So if there's something that you want me to improve on, let me know, and I will grow as such.
and if you want to skip ahead to hearing the analyses of each respective film, I will be giving a timestamp here. So if you want to hear the analysis of The Eyes of Tammy Faye, please go to the 3-minute mark. And if you want to hear the Being the Ricardos analyses, go to the 12.5-minute mark. And if you want to hear the Spencer analysis, go to the 18.5-minute mark. And then for the final Dune analyses, go to the 26-minute mark. Anyway, so let's get back to the movies at hand. Now sit back, relax, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies. The Eyes of Tammy Faye is a biographical drama film directed by Michael Showalter based on the 2000 documentary of the same name by Fenton Bailey and Randon Barbato of World of Wonder. The film tells the story of Tammy Faye Baker, played here by Jessica Chastain, from her beginnings in International Falls, Minnesota, through the rise and fall of her televangelism career, and then her marriage to Jim Baker, played here by Andrew Garfield. Now, it also stars Cherry Jones and Vincent D'Onofrio. Now, this film is obviously, like I said, the rise and fall of the 2 of the most famous televangelists in American history. This is obviously based on true events, and these 2 people became famous in the 1970s as pioneer televangelists. They met in 1960 at school, and then they began traveling the road together as ministers. Now, after struggling for a little bit, they were invited by Pat Robertson, who was a well-known televangelist at the time, to host a show on the Christian Broadcast Network. At the time, they were using puppets to explain Christianity, and Robertson wanted them to have a a children's show on his network. They agreed to doing this only on the condition that Jim could host a late night show as well. And then later on, Jim became the host of the 700 Club, which was this syndicated program that still remains on the air today. However, according to Tammy Faye, Robertson wanted to eventually take the spotlight for himself, and then he took over the show. And Robertson still hosts the show to this day and is fairly known for his somewhat bigoted comments. So after that, the Bakers then left CBN and helped launch the Trinity Broadcasting Network. However, they were soon pushed out of that as well. And then in 1974, the Bakers launched PTL Satellite Network, which is known for Praise the Lord Satellite Network. And they hosted the marquee show, the PTL Club, from 1974 to 1987. They grew, and then Tammy Faye became known for her voice, and then released a few more than a dozen gospel albums in the 1970s and 80s. Then in 1978, they founded Heritage USA, which is also known as Christian Disney World, in Fort Mill, South Carolina. Now, this show at its peak reached 13 million households, and Heritage USA grew to 2,300 acres and a value of $125 million. But then it all came crashing down in 1987 when Jessica Hahn, who was a former church secretary, stated that Jim Baker had sexually assaulted her in 1980. The ministry then paid her $200,000 to remain quiet, and then Jim started to say that it was a consensual relationship. However, the way Hahn later described her encounter with Jim sounds very much like rape. And while Hahn herself doesn't feel comfortable talking about it in those terms, she definitely believes that it wasn't consensual. Now, after all of this came up, Jim then removed himself as the head of PTL and ceded control over to Jerry Falwell, played in this film by Dion Frio, who is another evangelist with a history of fairly hateful comments. And then Falwell pushed them out of the business they founded themselves. In May 1987, Falwell said that the Bakers were no longer fit to leave PTL. He accused Jim of being secretly gay and claimed that Tammy Faye made a long list of demands in order for them to come back to PTL that included large annual salaries, 2 cars, a maid, a furnished house on a lake, among many other things. Now then, the government began investigating PTL's finances and brought criminal charges against Jim. In 1988, he was then indicted on 23 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy and was sentenced to 45 years in jail. Then in 1992, they divorced. And then Tammy Faye married Roy Mesner, who was this mega church designer, and then changed her last name. She then spent her final years continuing to sing, being on television, and rediscovering her relationship with God. The film touches on also her years-long battle with drug addiction, and toward the end of her life, her only addiction was to Diet Coke. And then her life became the inspiration for the 2000 Broadway production named Big Tent, the Tammy Faye Baker musical, and she died later that same year at the age of 65. Now, after appearing in an appeals hearing, Jim Baker's sentence was only reduced to 8 years, and then he paroled in 1994. He then started again as a televangelist and continues to this day. However, most recently, a judge ordered him to pay more than $156,000 after claiming that a health supplement could cure COVID-19. Now, the reason why Tammy Faye is such a big deal is that because she was a big departure from the norm, not only because of her gender, but also because she wanted to keep the movement out of partisan politics. And she was against the Christian right's judgmental condemnation of alternative lifestyles for a more inclusive approach. Both her and Jim believe that Christianity should be fun, and so they welcome Christians of all denominations into their church. And unlike evangelical leaders, including Jim, Tammy Faye actually supported the LGBTQ+ community. She also began attending gay pride events. In 1996, she became the co-host of a syndicated television show with Jim J. Bullock, who is an openly gay actor. When we first see Tammy Faye in this film, is that she's having these makeup applied, even though she has, and she'll confirms that she's had permanent lip liner, eyebrows, and eyeliner tattooed on. And she claims that she never really was photographed without her fake eyelashes, and all of this is true. Jim J. Bullock stated that it was suggested that Tammy remove her makeup just for a minute as part of a makeover segment, and she refused, declaring that it was unexpected self-insight, and basically a clown never takes off his makeup. And this film has true very small details, such as Tammy Faye's permanent makeup and the penile episode she hosted. However, as one of the biggest moments in her story was the Hahn affair, this film barely shows. Allegedly, the meeting between Baker and Hahn was at a telethon in Florida, where she was told that she was going to meet him and then babysit his children. However, she was then ushered into his hotel room, and how she puts it is that it was almost like meeting God, because this is somebody that she was watching throughout her entire early childhood, that she couldn't say no because of that, and she felt very pressured to be there. And then 7 years later, Becker basically started saying that he was the victim of the version, but Han dismissed this basically in 2017 when she said that he came into the hotel room and had sex with her, and that it actually was set up by somebody else to make happen. Now, before Tammy Faye died, did reconcile over the phone. Now, another issue that this film deals with is how it displays Tammy's affair. In the film, she's neglected by Jim, but she finds herself drawn to the music producer Gary Paxton, who Jim brought on to help Tammy record gospel music. Now, unlike Jim, he believes in her talent and really has a compassion, as well as telling that she's beautiful, but after they share a kiss, she is so mortified her water breaks. Now Tammy Faye did indeed work with a producer Paxton in Nashville, but what is also left out of the film is that Paxton's wife, Karen, told the LA Times that Tammy Faye was in love with Gary, or thought she was, and she knew that Karen knew it, and it was only a one-sided romance. Now, Paxton may have had this sympathetic ear, but he apparently had no romantic interest in Tammy. Now, this whole scene is kind of brushed over in the entire film. Either way, though, even without looking at its details, this film is very standard when it comes to biopics. Here are Jim and Tammy Faye enjoying the fruits of their church labors. They have respective sex scandals, and then they have tearful television confessions at how they're prosecuted, and then it becomes so fairly predictable down to where the montages show up at the end and they show you where they ended up as a whole. Now it ends with a somewhat upbeat sense of redemption for Tammy herself. Now, Garfield here is a delight to see on screen, and Dion Florio is able to play a good antagonist. Now, their performances are okay, they're nothing fantastic, but they're good. All but one of them is equal to that, and let's be honest, because it's her name in the title, it's frankly the one that matters. Chastain here is absolutely fantastic as Tammy Faye, and she may be the only reason to see this biopic at all. Chastain has had a few films in the past that have shown her talent, and frankly, this movie may be her Revenant, as that was for DiCaprio. This film isn't her best outing ever, but it's still really fantastic. She does an amazing job fleshing out Tammy Faye that even makes someone who has prior opinions of her change to being more sympathetic towards her. She honestly becomes Faye and is almost unrecognizable at times. It's a performance that occasionally makes you go, damn, Chastain is amazing here. The rest of the movie, it's fairly average when it comes to biopics. It succeeds with its acting, its direction, its message, and some of its details. However, some of them are downplayed, and its ending is fine, but does very little differently than other biopics. It's not one that I'd be willing to revisit anytime soon, but it wouldn't be a waste of time for someone who hasn't seen it for Chastain alone. Rate this at 3.5 out of 5. Now on to the next film. Being the Ricardos is a biographical drama film written and directed by Aaron Sorkin about the relationship between I Love Lucy stars Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. It stars Nicole Kidman and Javier Bardem as the famous television stars, with J.K. Simmons, Nina Arianda, Tommy Hale, Aaliyah Shawkat, Jake Lacey, and Clark Gregg in supporting roles. Now, no matter if you're a dedicated fan or not, the famed sitcom starring real-life married couple Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz as Lucy and Ricky Ricardo has had a huge amount of significance. It was released during a time when women were expected to be wives and mothers and nothing else. Lucille Ball as Lucy really shattered that conservative notion by wanting and pushing for more. And when it comes to representation, this show is the first ever to show a multi-ethnic relationship on the small screen, as Lucy is white and Ricky is Cuban. Now, in the show, Ricky is the super conservative and believes that Lucy should stay at home. Lucy is more progressive. The film then takes the story behind the development of the first episode and then puts it on screen. Desi was born Desiderio Alberto Arnaz y de Ancha III in Cuba, but his family fled to Miami after the Cuban Revolution of 1933. He then met Lucille Ball in 1940 while filming an adaptation of the popular musical Too Many Girls, and then they eloped later that year. Now, throughout the 1930s and 40s, Ball spent most of her time between being a model and a movie actress, and then when one executive at CBS asked her to adapt her radio persona into a sitcom, she had one condition, and that was her husband be cast alongside her. Now, because of the times, CBS was unsure how the audiences would receive an interracial couple. They obviously conceded to this and allowed the show to happen, and rest is history. Another significant event of this show is Lucy and Desi's real-life pregnancy, which eventually was written into the show with the guidance of religious figures. Now, prior to this, sex was not spoken about very much in mainstream media, so it was important that they handled it very carefully. Now, the birthing episode actually had nearly 45 million viewers, which was 19 million more than President Eisenhower's inauguration the following day. And it was also the first show to have a live studio audience instead of canned laughter. Now, the show originally aired on CBS from October 15, 1951 to May 6, 1957, with a total of 180 half-an-hour episodes, spanning 6 seasons. It obviously followed the life of Lucy Ricardo, who was a young middle-class housewife living in New York City, who often had plans with her best friends Ethel and Fred Mertz, and appeared alongside her bandleader husband Ricky Ricardo in his nightclub. Now, there's a lot of numerous schemes that Lucy deals with and tries to be part of show business. Now, I Love Lucy became the most watched show in the United States in 4 of its 6 seasons, and it was the first to end its run at the top of the Nielsen ratings. As of 2011, episodes of the show have been syndicated in dozens of languages across the world and remains popular with an American audience of 40 million each year. The show won 5 Emmy Awards and received many other nominations and honors. It was the first show to feature an ensemble cast, and as such is regarded as one of the greatest and most influential sitcoms in history. In 2012, it was voted the best TV show of all time in a survey conducted by ABC News and People magazine. Unfortunately, the show provided a lot of stress to Desi, along with building and maintaining a business and also having an intense tour schedule of his own. And it began to have an effect on their marriage via other women and alcohol. And then the couple divorced in 1960. Now, one of the issues that the film dissects is when Ball is being accused of being a communist. Now, in 1953, she became one of the celebrities targeted by the U.S. House of Representatives through the House Un-American Activities Committee during the so-called Red Scare time. Now, the committee learned in 1936 that she was registered as a member of the Communist Party. Now, she simply told the committee that she had been registered at the insistence of her grandfather, who was a self-proclaimed socialist. Now, the committee and the public accepted this reason, and then after accusations, Arnaz told the audience before a live taping of the show, quote, "The only thing red about this lady is her hair, and we're not even sure about that," end quote. Now, the film does have these true small details such as that. However, as with most biopics, there are things that never happened, such as the interviews. Those talking head interviews that are throughout the entire movie are performed by actors reading scripted lines written by Sorkin. Unfortunately, because that is the style of the film that this is taking, it makes the rest of the film feel completely contrived. In general, a Hollywood movie will take liberties with the true stories, but the film does do a good job of capturing a moment in Ball's life that feels honest, but it's not totally accurate. And if you want accuracy, you might want to go toward a documentary. Outside of that, the acting is average at best. Both Kidman and Bardem here are fine in their roles, but outside of makeup and costumes, they don't scream Lucy and Desi, even with the small amount of chemistry that they have. The film does take a somewhat unique choice to make the story somewhat non-linear, but is still a typical biopic. The story seriously would have benefited if it was a miniseries. That's because the plot itself has a lot going on. The core story takes place over the course of a single production week for this TV show, where the 3 events of the film basically come together and really try to make this show the biggest thing ever. But not really. The communist accusations were actually an issue during production of season 3, but Sorkin here condenses it before the premiere episode for the drama of it. And if they were going to do that, why not expand on things over the course of a miniseries instead of a film that feels fairly forced and contrived? The film overall serves only a purpose of putting Kidman and Bardem in a biopic together, as they are both very good actors. However, there's not much of a message outside of who Lucille Ball was and her importance, and in that sense it is good. So it has good acting, acting, a somewhat decent message and some of its details, and a somewhat good ending, but the direction and then some of the other details are fairly iffy, and the ending doesn't really entice a second viewing. 3 out of 5. On to the next film. Spencer is a historical fiction psychological drama directed by Pablo Larraín and is written by Stephen Knight. The film is about Princess Diana's existential crisis at Christmas because she wants to divorce Prince Charles and leave the British royal family. Kristen Stewart and Jack Farthing stars as Princess Diana and Prince Charles respectively, and they are joined by Timothy Spall, Sean Harris, and Sally Hawkins. Now, unlike the first 2 films in this episode, this is not a biopic, as it only wants to be a, quote, fable from a true tragedy, end quote. Now, Knight's screenplay here begins on Christmas Eve and then ends on Boxing Day that really delves into Diana's supposed psyche, and it allows the audience to simultaneously watch Diana but also be in this world that Larraín has made for her. And in a way, this film feels very similar to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, and that's not even from the Christmas time that the film takes place in. The film starts off with these traditional people wanting order and Diana having memories of her childhood where she was a much more free person. Now, before I get any further, Stewart here gives an amazing performance, showing this character who has issues dealing with her past, present, and future, like Dickens' Scrooge. And as history shows, Diana doesn't have the same result as Scrooge. And again, this film is not meant to be a biopic, and so they try to change it to where she actually does in a way. But going into the beginning, Larraín here shows that this is not going to be a biopic of showing how lovely Diana is. This is a film that's going to be trying to treat her as a individual person, straight from the opening line of "Where the am I?" Now, most people would not imagine this woman swearing, but here, Larraín immediately takes away the idea that Diana was the people's princess. He shows her here as a normal person with these issues. She wants to be happy, and she doesn't know if she should divorce Prince Charles or not. Now, this film shows Diana and her children being essentially outsiders from the rest of the royal family because they are cold and want to turn the heat up. Now, one could say that this is simply an allegory for how Larraín views the royal family as cold-blooded, or one could say that Diana and her children are not used to the royal traditions that they're being subjected to. And then this film goes into showing how tradition items aren't always what they seem. Diana in a scene is given a pearl necklace by Charles, which she immediately dislikes. Now, traditionally speaking, pearls are symbolic for purity, wisdom, and serenity. However, in this film, they're the opposite. It's the same necklace that Charles gives Camilla, and as such reminds Diana that he is having an affair with her. And throughout the film, she tugs at them as almost they were this chain to her life with Charles, and she's being suffocated by this royal world. And then she imagines herself tearing the pearls off at dinner and then eating them, which almost represent her wanting to break free of this world. But I will say I'm not totally sure of the meaning behind eating the pearls, aside from maybe a suicidal thought. And this necklace also connects her to Anne Boleyn, who is her ancestor, not by marriage, her actual blood ancestor. Now, each of them have had partners who had an affair, Anne Boleyn being one of the King of England's wives that was eventually executed, and in a way the film shows that both of them had affairs in themselves. Now, it is fairly known that Diana did have an affair, but most historians believe that Anne Boleyn did not. Now, Anne Boleyn is typically portrayed with a pearl necklace, however, which is another connection that Diana has with her. And this shows how Diana is connected to both her ancestors and the royals, with essentially both sides tugging at the pearl necklace. It represents the royal family because it's something that Charles gave to her, but it's also a part of who her family is, but it's also internal battle of does she keep to the Spencer side of things and leave, or the royal side of things and stay. And this is again her delving into her past, her present, and future. Now, if one did not know about Diana's eventual death and they did know about Anne Boleyn's, the similarities in this film would be enough for them to understand Diana's fate. And it really does parallel the two characters. Eventually, Diana Diana does tear off the pearls and becomes her own woman, and the film ends with showing her at the happiest when she was eating at a KFC with her children. Now, in this scene, the order is for Spencer, and at this moment, she has now fully reclaimed her heritage, and she has grown over the course of the film and the audience alongside her, which is a fairly positive outcome given what happens to her in real life. Now, Lorraine's choice to differ from the typical biopic story serves him extremely well. Instead of telling this typical plot, telling history, the film places the viewer inside Diana's mind, and he forms it similar to a horror film at times, with long shots down corridors that honestly align very similarly to Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining. Honestly, this film shows how even the British royalty can deal with issues. While not 100% accurate to Diana's, the film is not trying to be that. This film is not glorifying a person in any way. It's a fairly decent character study into someone finding their identity. Now the question then becomes, why focus on a real life character for this, especially when the story is not meant to be true? It's meant to be fiction, so why not make it about a fictional character? Well, the best answer is that even if it were true, the royal family probably would not allow it to be shared. So this aligns the film's plot with last year's One Night in Miami. In that film, they had conversations that aren't known to have happened word for word because they happen behind closed doors, but it is based around a true event with the four main characters of that film meeting together in Miami. And in this film, similarly, these are conversations that happen behind closed doors and also with Diana's psyche. Of course, we aren't going to know these things for sure. The film, however, does deal with reports of Diana and her experience with the royal family in order to construct this arc. Prince Charles did have a relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles in 1979, then they stopped when he married Diana. However, they resumed it again in the mid-80s, and this affair hit Diana very hard, who famously said that her marriage was, quote, a bit crowded, end quote, due to there being, quote, three of us, end quote. But she didn't separate because she didn't want to have a broken household for her children like she had as a child, but she did later confirm that she had an affair of her own with the rural riding instructor James Hewitt. Now this film also predicts her binging and purging in excruciating detail, and this is very accurate to her real life. Now Lorraine is able to take this historical person and show a side that we never really saw before, and most likely never really will see. It's not one that's meant to be 100% true, but it is a high possibility given everything else known about Diana. The film sets itself apart from typical biopics in that way. It is stylistically different, and that's not a bad thing. The film succeeds with its acting, its story, its direction, and its message. The only thing that it somewhat struggles with is it does feel a little forced with its an attempt to be this fictional fable instead of a possible true story like One Night in Miami. And this is mostly shown through how the film ends. It's not really a deal breaker for me personally, but it definitely is noticeable. Rate this 4.5 out of 5. Now on to the last film. Dune, or Dune Part 1, is an epic science fiction film directed by Denis Villeneuve and was written by Villeneuve, John Veitz, and Eric Roth. It is the first part of a two-part adaptation of the 1965 novel by Frank Herbert, which is mostly covering the first half of the book. It's set in the far future and follows Paul Atreides, played here by Timothée Chalamet, as his family. Noble House Atreides is put into this war for this deadly and inhospitable desert planet, Arrakis. Now, the ensemble cast includes Chalamet, Rebecca Ferguson, Oscar Isaac, Josh Brolin, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Stephen McKinley Henderson, Zendaya, David Dastmalchian, Zhang Chen, Sharon Duncan Brewster, Charlotte Rampling, Jason Momoa, and Javier Bardem. This film is the third adaptation of Dune, following David Lynch's 1984 film, which was a critical and commercial failure, and then John Harrison's 2000 miniseries. Now, I have not read the book, so I can't fully analyze that, but I did rewatch the first film prior to watching this version when this film was released originally. Now, the original film is quite weird and very different, and that film is one that has had problems as shown by its director completely disowning the film. And this is not really due to the film itself, but mostly for the production surrounding the film as a whole. He had budgetary constraints, and he claims that about a third of the movie was cut to fit the runtime, and this made the film a critical flop, grossing $30.9 million from a $40 million budget, which was the largest movie budget of the time, and as such, it was negatively reviewed by by critics. The difference with the new film is that it is only the first half a duology and was designed as such, even if the second film was only recently greenlit after this film got so much positive reception. And it's not exactly fair to compare the pacing of these films because of the first film having just wildly different productions and edits and different processes than this new film. Now, as with the older film, it is set in this future with this political thing going on. The Emperor of the known galaxy has shifted in power between these two warring houses, but granting the control of this planet to the Atreides clan. Now, this planet, like the original, is the only known supply of this precious natural resources known as spice. This psychoactive drug, with somewhat interesting side effects, also allows interstellar travel to happen. Now, House Atreides is different from the prior House Harkonnen in that they want peace instead of applying cruelty. Now, as this film is about Paul and him being the chosen one, we see him grow as a human. Now, the direction of this film is amazing to say the least. Throughout his career, Villeneuve has, in a similar way to Paul, surrounded himself with amazing talent that has really set the stage for him to take this so-called unmakeable story and put it on screen. He allows his cinematographer Greg Fraser to give this story a grand scale for each moment on screen. His production designer Patrice Vermont, his art director Tom Brown, and costume designers Bob Morgan and Jacqueline West are all given a lot of room to flex and develop their skills. But a great cast and Hans Zimmer's score to this, and Villeneuve's fans has a really commanding sense of confidence that one really feels while watching it. Now, all the actors here are perfect in their roles. Momoa is the swashbuckling Duncan Idaho, Charlotte Rampling is this imposing religious figurehead, and Oscar Isaac is fairly charming as the Atreides patriarch. The standout here, though, are Ferguson and Chalamet, as they both give depth to the characters that they're playing. Now, Dune puts a lot of weight on characters and how they interact with each other and their situations. Now, because the movie has more time to manage the plot, it can afford to do so without really sacrificing any narrative progression. Now, the best example of this is with Paul, who remains the character with the most screen time. Now, Villeneuve shows him hesitating and being nervous. And in other words, we're seeing him development into him and that he needs to develop more over the course of the entire story. And he has these relationships that get elaborated on properly and then expand on that adequately. Paul also has intimate scenes with his mother and father where they talk about their desires and regrets, and these are the things that move the plot along. Though with a film that has a cast like this and such a developed narrative, some character performances can fall into the background, such as Chang Chen's Dr. Yue and Stellan Skarsgård's as the Harkonnen figurehead. Another weakness of this film is that it's not a complete story, and its ending is mostly an effort to force the second part into existence. As such, this is not a self-contained film, thematically or narratively. Villeneuve leaves most of the messianic storyline incomplete, as he's more trying to deal with the film's metaphor for settler colonism. Then there's so much that the film does not go into because it was purposefully done as a two-parter. While not a bad thing in the traditional sense, because of its visual and acoustic experience, it does leave a lot up in the air, but not in the same way that Empire Strikes Back does. In that film, we know that they have to do things in the following film, but the core plot of the overall story has completed. It may be a sad moment in that trilogy, but it doesn't sacrifice the story only to set up the next film. However, despite its 2.5-hour runtime, Dune does not feel like that at all. Ultimately, it's not really a failure on Villeneuve's part so much, because from what I'm told about the novel, a 2.5 runtime is not really enough time to cover everything. It may also be a film that is not for everyone, and that is by no means a bad thing. It only hurts when it comes to its story and its ending, but again, it's hard to say that as a full negative, as it was done purposefully. It does succeed with its acting, its details, its direction, and half of its story and half of its ending. This rating, honestly, given with the asterisk that it depends so much on part 2 and could change later on, but at this point, a 4 out of 5. Now, what did you think of these films? Let me know. Hit me up on social media.
The Formal Review is on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram, and also YouTube. The handle's all the same. It's at The Formal Review. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, I thank you very much for supporting me in that way. For anyone who wants to support, you can go to anchor.fm/The Formal Review. Click support this podcast, and any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wash your hands. If you're able to, get vaccinated. and I'll see you at the movies.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Formal Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.
Characters.